Hi, welcome back to class for our third week, so our module 3. And we're just moving along here with the textbook and slowly developing understanding for what social policy is. And I'm sure you're noticing that social policy is a very, very wide area of study. So I try to hammer this down over and over again. It's a mixture of sociology, social psychology, political science, economics, um, behavioral economics, business. It's everything. And so it comes together to be a very, very large class where we cover a lot of big ideas. But in doing so, this is a survey class, and so we're basically going to skim the surface and just move along looking at what things are. And these are all areas of study that people tend to focus on. A lot of us are, bent towards social justice, and so we'll take these various aspects of social policy and lead them towards social justice, economically and socially, and there we go. So we're going to continue looking at the origins and development of the social work profession this week. We're going to look at how when policies are implemented and look at policy analysis some more. And then move into chapter 5 that focuses on the market economy and social justice. And so we'll start looking at the interesting discussion of taxes and funding, or the question of defunding our programs, policies, and priorities. And kind of see how that fits into the idea of social policy. And funding and defunding is a major issue. You put your money where you care to see things invested in. Over the last few decades, we've seen a shift in monies going from investing in education that has been defunded heavily. And there's been a lot of criticism lately about the increased funding towards militarization of police forces. So where does that fit into our policy? And so one thing I try to do is to stay a little less topical. A very hard thing for me to do in this class, but I'm gonna try to do so and stick with the book at first. Towards the end, we will have a policy discussion on our current economic situation, and so I did really bring that in recently. But you're going to move on to chapters 4 and 5. So I hope you're enjoying the book. Again, you'll have 2 weeks to answer these quizzes. So if you manage your time well, this should not be difficult. You're going to start answering your post to the Module 2 discussion. And remember, you have to log on at least 3 different days to answer these posts. Each post you have, you're going to have numerous topics each week. And you have to have 3 different responses on each of those topics. I will post a follow-up video about that because there are some people who aren't getting it, and we'll move through that. And so I'll try to work you through that, and we'll address that issue. There's going to be a video you're going to watch on Park Avenue, Money, Power, and the American Dream. It's a documentary. Again, this is a video that some people might think was a little biased, and it is. It's skewed towards social justice, and it's looking at Park Avenue. People who know me know I'm from New York, and I'm very proud of being from the Bronx. And so this looks at Park Avenue in Manhattan versus Park Avenue in the South Bronx, discussing how you can have the same street and you could have basically neighbors down the road from each other who are living in 2 different realities. And this video gets into the power and policy-making ability of the people who are very rich in Park Avenue, Manhattan, versus the reality of people who live in the Bronx, where they have a lot less power. And this gets into that. So I want you to write a summary of the documentary and include a conclusion discussing something that you learned from this film. And really, I think we should move on past the idea of talking about your political ideology. If you don't agree with the film, don't agree with the premise of the idea of the economic issues that people face, that's fine. But that's not really part of the class discussing that. So you're still gonna have to discuss something that you learned from this film. So even if you are really a free market capitalist and you think everything's fine for everybody, I still want you to take a main takeaway that you got from this. Again, I don't really want to hear your opinion on the film. That's not really relevant. Then we're going to watch Jeffrey Sachs. He's an economist from New York City, at Columbia University. Also one of the directors of the Earth Institute, and he does a lot of really interesting economics research on things like happiness and how to try to eliminate global poverty. Very interesting person. And you're going to watch a interview with Sachs. It's an old interview. Part of my efforts to try to remain very untopical and not just criticize what's happening now is to step back a little bit to the last administration, and we can watch Jeffrey Sachs have a lot of criticism for both the Obama administration at the time and the Republicans who were in charge of Congress at the time and how they were operating. We're going to take these ideas and move towards the present a little bit more going forward, but this really gets into the groundings of some major changes in economic policy in this country. And if you're interested in this, there is a great book called It's Worse Than It Looks. It's a political science book, but it gets into economic dysfunction in Congress, and starting around that time. So you're gonna watch that interview, and then you're gonna read a Warren Buffett op-ed. It's called The Minimum Tax for the Wealthy, and this is often spoken about op-ed where Warren Buffett argues that the wealthy need to be taxed at a higher rate. He complains that they face a very flat tax structure, and in fact, he does in some videos explain how he could avoid paying taxes for the rest of his life if he wanted to. It's not very complicated for somebody with a lot of means. And so he argues that the wealthy should be paying a lot more in taxes. So I want you to read his op-ed and discuss that a bit. So you're going to do a Dropbox on that. Both of these Dropboxes are due the end of this week. Well, we have the chapter 4 and 5 quiz that you'll see. You have 2 weeks for those, so that's due 2 weeks from today. And then I want you to post 4 initial discussion posts for the Module 3 discussion. And a way that's really rich to show that you're learning and to grow in this class is to speak amongst yourselves. Hearing lectures from me and watching videos, that's great and everything, but when you get to discuss amongst yourself, you'll really be able to pull in a deep understanding of the topic and end up adjusting your ideas. And so that's the idea of a discussion if it's done right. And again, I will have a video that I'll put up either on Monday or Tuesday explaining how to address our discussion posts, because there's some people who are kind of missing this. And then we're moving on to paper part 1 Dropbox. We're going to start working on a paper. It's due the end of the semester. It's broken up incrementally, and I know that's kind of a bad word for some people in political science, but I will argue that incremental decision making and incremental action is the best way to get things finished. I don't sit down and write a class overnight. I work on this in increments. I work on it, I put it away, come back to it, work on it, and clean up my mistakes and try to make things better. That's incrementalism. You don't do things overnight. So in going down what we have, I will have this video up here. Module 2 discussion. Remember, you're going to log on to this, and I want you to hit on both of these. 3 responses per thread. So you do 1 each day for 3 different days, total of 6 responses. And you'll be fine. You could do more than that if you want, and I do encourage you to do more. My top students generally do a lot more than just 6 responses on a week when we have 2 discussion threads. And they usually have closer to 12 or 15. Then we have the PowerPoint presentations. I don't speak on these. It's just provided by the author. You can read those if you want. Don't need to. Please don't print them. Again, all the quizzes are open book. Take your time, read it. There's no reason you shouldn't get an A on the quiz. Here's our documentary on Park Avenue, Money, Power, and the American Dream. Again, write a summary of the documentary and at least include one paragraph discussing what you learned from the film. Again, not really your opinion. That's not really important. I care what you learned from this. And if I have 12 students in the class, I'd like to see hopefully 12 different ideas of what people learned. We're not all the same. Chapter 5 assignment. Here's the Dr. Sachs interview from Democracy Now! And then I have 2 links to the op-ed. The first one's the direct link to the New York Times. The second one is a Word document that has it in case you have a hard time downloading it. Last semester we had an issue. Discussion forum for Module 3. There is a video here looking at the labor market. And this, towards the end of the video, it gives you some information to help you out with this question here. This question is answered in the textbook in looking at the primary, secondary, and tertiary labor markets. Again, these are not looking at the manufacturing of goods. This is taking that idea and pivot. Sociology is all about pivots. And so in earlier Soc classes, you may have heard about a primary, secondary, tertiary market and had to do with raw goods and then processing and service. This one gets more to the takeaways from your job. So how much money you make, how many benefits you get, your job security, primary labor market, secondary a little bit less, and tertiary looks at things like people who work seasonal jobs, maybe people who are housekeepers in seasonal hotels, and maybe farm workers who are doing stoop labor and working different fields, different days of the week. They have a little less security, less money. Going back to chapter 3, we do have this question here looking at when social workers have retreated from the effort of reform and social justice. So I want you to go back and think about that and write your initial post on that. From chapter 4, individualism. So what are some of the consequences in believing in the importance of individualism and self-reliance on the social work clients for ourselves, and how are these values limiting? And then I went over chapter 5 question, and then a takeaway. So last week we watched videos, one on Whole House, which I just love that video. Jane Addams is amazing. And you also seen an interview with Jennifer Granholm and Eugene Bardak. Again, I got those videos from Berkeley, and so they use those for their intro to social policy class for their grad school students. And Larry Rosenthal go ahead and gave me permission to use them for this class, and I like those videos too because they get us into a former governor, and we have a person who wrote a textbook, helped create what we're studying. Not the book we're using, but Bardak is a very smart person and has done a lot. And if you are interested in this, you probably will read his book eventually. He has one of the ways of dealing with social policy. And we have the quizzes here. And lastly, paper part 1. And you're going to write a minimum of 3 paragraphs. This is a starting point for working on your paper for the rest of the semester. Remember, we're doing this incrementally. So first, identify a social problem that has been addressed by a social policy that you want to research. So you could think of any problem you want and try to think of a policy that was done to deal with this. Number 2, discuss the history of the social problem and any previous attempt to ameliorate the problem that you know of. If you can't think of one, that right there is something you could put down. I haven't found any previous effort to do this. And lastly, identify a social policy that addresses the problem that you want to focus on. Again, there may not be one. Sometimes we get some policies that are really new, things that are brand new that are coming out. Well, that's when we get a little creative and we could have a little more fun. So it's up to you. If you have any questions, make sure you send me an email, and I would love to chat. Otherwise, have a great week, and keep an eye out for the video I'll put up the earlier part of this week. Thank you.